will be important to your future and your practice, because between licensing and state requirements and ethics and social media, we really need to be a little careful and more aware, and maybe just a little more meditative about how to handle these things with our clients, because sometimes the best defense is a good offense, which is trying to figure out a way to navigate this. I thank Lori for plugging my book. I wrote it and will be rewriting it in the coming year to re-release it at its 5th anniversary, because so much has happened in the world of mediation and conflicts over people, over animals, conflicts between people over animals, that I really need to update the book. It's 5 years old. It's called Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt: How to Use Mediation to Resolve Conflicts Over Animals. I'll get to that slide. So let me see. I'm trying to see. Oh, okay, I'll do it this way. So who am I? Okay, I'm a reformed litigator. I drank the Kool-Aid of mediation about 10 years ago, and I shut my litigation practice and will only mediate conflicts between people over animals. And when I did it, my husband told me, that is a really narrow niche. And I go, I don't think so. Because you as mental health professionals know how impactful animals are to the people who love them, and how many things can come up with respect to animals that'll create conflict: neighbor conflicts, divorce conflicts, landlord-tenant conflicts, trust and estate conflicts. All of these things surround a conflict that could be over an animal between differing people. As an aside, I show Irish setters and long-haired dachshunds. So some of the most litigious people in the world are the dog show people who are suing each other for under co-ownerships or for who said what to whom. And that was my bread and butter as a litigator. I have successfully navigated shifting a number of people from immediately going to guns to having a conversation with a neutral in the room. You all know that having a neutral in the room who's going to listen makes a huge difference. As Lori said, I'm an international speaker. Conflict resolution is clear. MAP is the plan you make for your pets long-term, short-term. There was just a huge article in the New York Post, which of course my husband has to get even though we're in Maine, that said that a number of, actually, I take that back. It was on my Facebook and LinkedIn. I found the article and posted it because people were taking the time to move their horses out of the way of Hurricane Dorian. I teach people how to do that. It was something that happened to me. I was injured. I couldn't take care of my dogs. I realized, wow, I have no plan. And I didn't think I was the only person in the universe who didn't have a plan. So I decided to create a program that helps people address the plan, because it really is so important. So that's the MAP plan. And of course, I speak with all the newspapers because they don't know how to deal with me, because why wouldn't I litigate? I said, because it never serves the animal. It serves the egos of the people who are fighting, but it doesn't serve the animal. So that's where I'm coming from. And I know none of us as professionals have egos, but our clients may. And so we have to make sure we respect that. Okay, I'm over here. I'd like to thank you for coming to this webinar. First of all, it's summertime and it's a huge turnout. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I'm hopeful that you take away new insights in how to, and tools on how to address emotional support animals and service animals. I made a joke and said, so you want an ESA or an SA? In this webinar, though, we'll be addressing the definitions and the differences between the responsibilities for an SA and an ESA. So as you know, an SA is a service animal and an ESA is an emotional support animal. It's like broccoli and cauliflower. They're in the same vegetable group maybe, but they're totally different. We're going to address conflicts that may arise between your client and you, another practitioner and you, a colleague's opinion. When I was doing research for this, the amount of colleague opinions I found was numerous, to say the least. But most of them fell on the side of don't do it, don't do it. And as a mediator, I get it. And as an attorney, I get it even better. However, there are ways to address these questions when they arise. And looking out for what is and what may be on the horizon is, I think, why all of you came here, because I hope at the end you ask a lot of questions, throw anything at me, tell me what you've experienced, and I will be more than happy to stay on the line as long as necessary to answer any of your questions, because this is an area that's fraught with difficulties for you as a professional. So you have to balance your state ethics and your licensing law with client demands. And let me tell you, it is really difficult to address a client who has an animal that to them has created a much better quality of life because they're there. Well, not to be flippant, and please don't take this the wrong way, I think if someone has an animal that doesn't give them emotional support, reduce anxiety, and reduce depression, they might think about placing the animal, because that's what animals do. That is what they do. So we all should have ESAs, which of course would then solve all the problems, because we just would all have ESAs. But there would be other problems, i.e., we'll get to them later, but allergies and fear. When I do my mediation, sometimes it's just as simple as, I'm so afraid of this dog that's in my building. Not because he's a vicious dog, but I'm afraid of dogs. And no one ever accommodates the accommodator. So this program will help you learn basic skills on how to address it, how to talk about it, how to think about it yourself in a way that will make it less a conflict and more a conversation. If you take the outside studies, I've attended many, many human-animal bond conferences, because in my neck of the woods for mediations of conflicts over animals, it is people taking on their pets as something more than just the family dog, the family cat, the horse. No, they are now either companions or members of the family. And as such, they've taken on an anthropomorphizing piece of our lives. It is really important to recognize that, because even though you might not think about an animal in the way your patient or colleague or other professional thinks of an animal, as you know, because you're professionals, you have to respect and appreciate where they are before you can talk about whether or not it's going to work for you to join them there. I don't think this is as big an issue as it is in most of my clients, like veterinarians who have conflicts with their clients all the time. But the social media rage risks do happen. Likely none of you Facebook friend your clients, so they may or may not be able to trash you on Facebook. Veterinarians are always subject to being trashed on Facebook. But there may be some residual comments that are made to other people that you'd like to learn skills on how to nip in the bud, because it really does create issues. And when I talk to my veterinarians and my dog show people who've been really maligned on Facebook, writing a cease and desist letter fuels the fire. As you know, as mental health professionals, asking people to come in and have a conversation, either on Zoom so they feel safe, or maybe if you all live in the same area, with a neutral, it helps to really address the perspective and perception, as opposed to just firing off, you're wrong and this is why you're wrong and blah, blah, blah. Never helps. Social media, it will be the death of us all, God forbid, but it'll kill us, because people just read things differently, say things differently. They have more bravado on the internet, and so it can really create issues. So I don't think that's a real big problem for mental health professionals. Let me know in the chat box. Let Lori know so that I can address it more fully, because I'm not going to really go into it unless you guys ask me to, and then I will. These are some of the animals your patients may ask you to authenticate as their emotional support animal. You can also add parrots to this. The only recognized emotional support animals are dogs, really, some cats, no peacocks, no pigs. The mini horses go either way, depending. That happens to be my horse. He is not a mini horse, but I didn't have a mini horse picture, so I had to put him in. I try to keep my pictures of my animals to my own, so no one says to me, "You used my pet." Yeah, I know. I always get permission though, from the dogs and the horse. I get permission. The cat too. Service animals do not or should not require your sign off. So other than going through the definitions so you understand the difference, these are really out of your hands. You should not, except maybe for the psychological service animals who are trained to provide an absolute service to one of your clients with PTSD, or with a severe psychological breakdown that requires a dog who's trained to really the nth degree. They have to be licensed. The dogs have to be licensed as service animals. It's a whole different can of worms, and we'll get to that in another slide or two. But they're trained to provide a service in addition to your work, and they shouldn't be recommended by your work. They are something different. They are not emotional support animals. The issues arise when you, as their treating mental health professional, are asked for a note. And I know you've all been asked for a note, and if you haven't, God bless you. But everyone's been asked for a note. And then they go to the internet and get the note from, service animals, Acme service animals, not Acme service animals, Acme social emotional support animals, to gain access to travel with their animals. When you're asked this question, what's the first thing you should do? Write it in the chat box. We'll go back to it later at the questions. But what's the first thing you think you should do when you're asked that question? I'm going to see if I can see the chat box here. I cannot. Hold on 1 minute, because we have plenty of time. I think I only have Lori, so I'm not going to be able to see the chat box. That's all right. The first thing you should do, actually.
Oh, you should be able to see it. Can you?
I will. I'll go to the chat. Here's more. Hold on. Yeah, you came up and then you went away. Zoom is wonderful. I love it. Oh, goodness. There we go. Hold on. There too. Chat. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, I limited it to you, so I don't think oh, 2 more messages. Hold on. Nope. I only get you, but asked to take time to evaluate. Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so you can see them?
Yeah, I can see them now.
Okay.
Sure. Perfect. Okay. So here we go. So first, educate yourself on the differences between the service animal, the emotional support animal, the therapy dog, and the psychological animal. They're different. You need to know the federal laws regarding access for the service animal and the emotional support animal. I don't know if all of you know that. There's a severe difference in access for these animals. And then become fluent in the ethical standards in your state licensing with respect to writing emotional support animal letters. These 3 items are key to adequately addressing your client's question. And it's really not about getting in a confrontation with them. Well, the board says this, and an emotional support animal does this. It really is a little bit more than that. And I talk about how to start this conversation in a meaningful way without it spiraling into conflict. The minute you say, well, I don't know that I can do that, they're going to be going crazy, because why not? I see you, you're working with me for my anxiety or my depression or my anxiety and depression or whatever it is that this animal supplies emotional support for. And when I fly, I get very anxious. And when I go to dinner, I get very anxious. Well, you need to ask curious questions when they ask you for this animal. So instead of telling them, this is, at first, telling them this is what an emotional support animal can and cannot do, ask curious questions. Ask them, well, tell me a little bit more. My mediation, I always start with, well, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Can you, let's talk about that. Let's delve into that a little bit more deeply, which I know all of you as mental health professionals, you have 18 ways to say that same sentence. So you're way ahead of most of my clients. So you want to ask curious questions. You want to start with why. And I know some of you may or may not agree with that, but why would you want this? And then of course, because you're all mental health professionals and you're good at this, really listen well before you speak, because you may be able to pick out some commonalities that will work with you to enable them to understand why they may not be served by having an emotional support letter written for them in the future, especially for young people, because what is written in those letters can and may be impactful. So you really want to make sure they understand what's going on. So you have to educate yourself, and you have to educate your client, your patient, and your colleagues, because sometimes, there was an article by Dr. Youngren that went on and on about how people are writing these emotional support animal letters, and their ethics were really going to be compromised. And I go into it a little bit deeper later when I talk about when emotional support animals have created havoc, have bitten someone, have defecated. As a former practicing litigator, the people I'm going to plead are the people who created the situation. And the first person who created the situation is the psychologist, psychiatrist, or a mental health professional who gave this person an emotional support animal letter for a dog they may or may not have ever seen. And I know all of you will, I think all of you will agree with me. Your magnificence is not evaluating animals as emotional support animals. I mean, I don't know that they teach a class in that. And I don't think any of you are human-animal bond studiers. Some of them are. And in fact, the first article I'm going to address is a woman who's a human-animal bond educator, as well as a practicing mental health professional, and has her own emotional support animal. And so you can believe that, in fact, she will be right up there saying, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Then you have the other articles that say, no, not so much. What we have to do is figure out how to have that conversation in a way that's going to make sure that everyone comes away thinking, I did my best, this is not going to work for me, and either I'm okay with my client going to someone else, I'm okay with staying with my mental health practitioner because they showed me the reasons why this might impact my life in a greater way than I've ever considered. So first we start with the acts. These are all the acts you have to read. You should read. Try to get the Cliff Notes. You'll get some Cliff Notes here. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the Aircraft Carrier Access Act, 1986, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. All of the above require that people with disabilities be permitted to use animals in a variety of settings. The issues arise with, as you can imagine, the way the acts were written. They were written with a mix-up of meaning to certain words. So sometimes things like the Aircraft Carrier and the Fair Housing Act are felt to fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. They don't fall under it at all. Because the Americans with Disabilities Act is a service animal that's been trained to do a certain service for you, not to provide an emotional support for you. So the first working definition I'm going to give you, I'm sure you guys might know this already, but I'm going to give it to you again because you never can go over it too much. A service animal is an animal, dog, mini horse. Those are the only animals that are, in fact, there was just a new mini horse that went on an American Airlines plane and really annoyed the person in first class because he kept banging into the back of the seat. But a dog or mini horse, specially trained to perform a task for an individual with a disability, including a physical, sensory, intellectual, and mental disability. This is where the gray area comes in because they really only mean that, physical or sensory, intellectual, or mental disability that the service animal can identify and serve as an alert dog. But it doesn't say that there. But that's what they meant when they wrote it. If you read all of the dicta that goes around, sorry, big word, lawyer thing, all the, language that was used around the drafting of it, and what's come down as decisions from it. The task performed must be directly related to the individual's disability. This is clear as mud, but the clearest they could come up with at the time. So here we are, we have the service animal, and then we have the emotional support animal that's defined in the Aircraft Carrier and Fair Housing Act. Definitions of the terms used in Regulation 117E: if a passenger seeks to travel with an animal that is used as an emotional support or psychiatric service animal, that's where we get screwed up, because it should have only been emotional support animal, because the psychiatric service animal would fall under ADA and therefore be able to fly. However, here we are. The passenger needs to provide current documentation, less than 1 year old, on letterhead from a licensed mental health professional that states the following, which you all probably know and loathe. The passenger has a mental or emotional disability recognized in the DSM-4. I think it might be up to 5 now, but maybe it's still 4. The passenger needs emotional support or psychiatric service animal as an accommodation for their air travel or for activity at the passenger's destination. The individual providing the assessment is a licensed mental health professional, and the passenger is under his or her professional care. Now, later I'll talk about how foisting it off on a forensic mental health professional may not really serve you either, because, okay, so I gave it to Lori so she could do it because she's a forensic mental health professional and I'm not. But, I would counsel Lori, but you're not the mental health professional taking care of this person who says they need something for anxiety or depression. So, it gets a little muddy and crazy. The date and type of mental health professional's license and the state or jurisdiction in which it's issued. I'm sure all of you have read this a million times and, want to jump through a hoop, because this doesn't make it clear to you whether or not you should do this. So I put it here. As with all federal laws, they are subject to interpretation. I think interpretation also seems to run the gambit when mental health discussions occur about service animals and emotional support animals, because it's all about interpretation. I'm trying to catch the time. It's 3:25, I think. Oh, good. I won't be too much longer. Starting with the most recent article. So this is the article that Please Don't Leave. I have a slide that says Please Don't Leave. Because if you don't address this when your client brings it in, it really doesn't help your client and your relationship, or the understanding of service animals and emotional support animals in the scheme of things. It does take time. I mean, we may or may not want to do it, but it really needs to be done in a, a curious, thoughtful way that starts with listening and finding common ground. So Janet Hoy-Gerlich actually is a colleague of mine. She's a friend of mine. I believe she's the person in this article who stated she has an emotional support animal. And her takeaway from this, because she is also a human-animal bond researcher, please don't hang up, everyone. She documents that her chronic mental health conditions are facilitated very well by her emotional support animals' position in her life. And she believes mental health recovery and the new legal definitions of disability can be met by this research. Now, this research is coming out, and we all know it's coming out. So if you want to stay stuck, you can stay stuck. But all of this emotional support, human-animal bond, making your life better, as I said at the beginning of this, I think that if your dog doesn't make your life better, or your cat or your bird or your horse or your reptile, any animal that you love and feed and take care of, if they don't make your life better, you should really find them a new home. So I'm in the camp sort of like you guys. Wait a minute, this is just a companion animal. This is something that, just provides its companionship. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do when I become ensnared in these conflicts. Here's your, before you drop off the webinar, because Lori had advised me gently that maybe don't go into the human-animal bond thing, but really I can't address this if I'm going to be neutral without addressing the human-animal bond as well as the ethical standards. And believe me, I handle those. You must educate yourself. That's where you all are brilliant, because all of you are magnificent readers and studiers and educators. Don't just educate yourself. I always say, at the end of this, it'll have a cute slide at the end. Don't be a leader who doesn't ask questions. You really want to be part of a discussion that doesn't agree with you, because you learn so much, and you all know that. So it's not that you need to change the way you think, but your thinking will broaden if you take a moment to really be part of a conversation that doesn't agree with you. So your client will come to you with this article. I guarantee it. It was just published in July or August. So August. So they're going to come to you with this and say, hey, look at this. There's a study. The article seeks to present ESAs as a valid psychological rehabilitation intervention consistent with the tenets of mental health recovery. I think somebody needs to mute, because I don't think that's me. So that's what they're going to point out to you. And what are you going to say? Well, due to the anthropomorphizing of companion animals, your client's going to want you to do this. This is someone who has taken these animals on as a member of their family, a companion, an emotional support animal. Your client's ability to find more empirical and theoretical research supporting ESAs as valid psychological rehabilitation intervention will be easy. So if you don't figure out how to address this now before they do, then it'll be more difficult for you. And I think that's why Lori asked me to come on today and come on again next week to talk about what it is we might do to make sure that you have this discussion cemented in your mind in a way that isn't cement, if I can be so bold, where you actually allow your client to say everything they need to say, and then delve into why they think this would be a good opportunity, and then delve into why it may not be a good opportunity for you, and let them know why. How can you address this overload of information with less angst? Very few professionals know, well, I've already done this, what they face. Lawyers are notorious for skipping this step in evaluating. You guys as professional mental health professionals, you know this step. Lawyers, we're really bad at this step. I've become much better in the 10 years that I've been mediating. But what can you do to address the request, protect yourself, and remain relevant? Stop, drop, and roll. So when I started writing my book, it was really important to me to give people easy things to use as triggers when they are hit with something that they don't know the answer for. So I came up with stop, drop, and roll, because when that happens, it sometimes makes you feel like you're on fire. Sometimes makes you feel as if, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've got to run, tuck and roll. What am I going to do? So I've come up with stop, drop, and roll to help all of you understand, again, the curious questions, to start with why, listen well before you speak. Well, stop talking and listen, because it'll help you identify where you agree, where you don't agree, and what might serve you. It's amazing. And you know this because you're all mental health professionals and listen much better than other professionals. Mostly my guys, the lawyers, never listen. Drop the need to be right. Now, this is a little harder. My veterinarians really have a hard time doing this. Attorneys really never get to do this. And you might think, well, Deborah, you're doing this right now. You think you're right. Well, I don't think I'm right. I just think I would love to give you the skills so that you can drop the need to be right, so that you can hear more fully what someone is saying. And then let what they say roll off your back. So if they start getting antagonistic or accusatory or ugly, let it roll off your back. I've had more clients who I coached on stop, drop, and roll, who had a discussion with someone they never thought they would, because they didn't rise to the bait. And when they didn't rise to the bait, the fire went out. So it's a lot simpler to say stop, drop, and roll. Not so simple to do. And you as mental health professionals know that. So then I suggest you go back to slide 8, which I've spoken of twice now. Ask curious questions, start with why, and listen well before you speak. So now we're going to start with the ethical input, which is the most important piece of this webinar, because no one wants to lose their license. I certainly don't want to lose my license as an attorney when I mediate. I don't want to lose because of course, as an attorney who mediates, your license to practice law would be subject to any malpractice you might perpetrate as a mediator. So you not only have to follow the rules of mediation, you have to follow the rules of litigation. So it's very crazy. But you all have your ethical input, your ethical guidelines, and everyone is writing these articles. I always hate the 2 hours of ethics that you get at every continuing legal education course because it scares the daylights out of you. And you're like, well, I just might as well never speak to anyone, talk to anyone, recommend anyone, or take any notes, because all of that can be used against me. And so I'm just not going to do it. Well, we can't do that because we're professionals. So this article by Alon, I think it's Alan, but it's a woman, Dr. Dingle, unexpected requests, ethical considerations related to support animals. Now I have to say that she's been on the ethics committee. She was the chairman of the ethics committee. So she's definitely going to scare the daylights out of you. So I'm just putting it here to put it out there. As with any ethics committee member, articles or reports will lay out the ethical pitfalls of any letter in support of ESA, not what you should do if asked. So that's what I always find so difficult. These ethical letters state what's going to happen to you if you do it, but not what you should do in a useful way when you're asked. Dr. Dingle warns it's important to clarify the purpose and potential ramifications. Well, you also have to clarify the purpose and potential ramifications for your clients as well. And you have to do it in a way that doesn't, oh, whatever. Am I still there? I think I'm still here. The purpose, potential, and ramifications of others. So fear arises in this article from the possibility of a practitioner going from a role of therapist to the role of evaluator. Dr. Dingle raises these concerns due to the impact such a multiple relationship might have on his or her relationship with a patient. Well, you're always a therapist, and I'm sure that evaluation comes with the territory. But when you're evaluating for the purposes of an emotional support animal, that's where the sticky wicket starts. And that's where you might want to take a step back and do the questioning, the why, and the listening, because it really will serve you later on, instead of going into, well, I don't think you need this, or, I don't think that the potential ramifications. Don't start there. That's where you're going to get, after you ask them all the reasons why, and you write them down, and this as mental health professionals, you ask them again. So this is what I heard you say, and this is why you want it. And tell me again what this is going to do for you. Because the more you flesh out why they want this emotional support animal, the better you'll have an idea of what to do going forward. All right. So in his article, Dr. Youngren, I also sat through his program, and many of you might have, where he talked about the emotional support animal. He states a psychologist is often being called upon to write letters in support of a client's need for an ESA. This is where conflicts between forensic and therapeutic roles become clear. And that's, again, a little troublesome for me, because if you are the therapeutic mental health professional, you are the person who has assisted this person to understand their mental health. The forensic is going to figure out whether or not they should get an emotional support animal. Whose responsibility is it to make that decision, since you're the mental health professional and the therapeutic mental health professional? I don't know how in his article he delineates one or the other. And if any of you can explain that to me, that would be great. But for me, it was like, well, you really can't have peanut butter without jelly, because, it just doesn't taste good. And so you really need to make sure that if you're going to abdicate your role to a forensic professional, mental health professional, you understand that that doesn't, in my opinion, as an attorney, it doesn't wipe you clear. It really doesn't. It's not. Remember that the ethics writers, this is their job description. They are Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Yes, it is. With respect to ESA letters, you truly want to be aware that the sky is falling, and it's falling really quickly, because there is so much backlash between emotional support animals and the general public. And there is so much support coming down, whether you believe it or not, whether you think it's legitimate or not, from the human animal bond researchers. and I use that term respectfully, they really are finding that these animals are doing great things with autism, and those would be service animals. Those wouldn't be emotional support animals. But there are some people who will label them as emotional support animals. They may not be able to afford a trained dog. They may think their dog does it for them. There are so many different aspects that have to be explored. And unfortunately, you're on the front line because you're the mental health professional. So as Dr. Dingle points out, and I do agree with her in this quote, explain the limits of your role as a treating psychologist and clarify the complexities of disability evaluations. I think this is the linchpin to how you ask curious questions, start with why, and listen well before you speak. And once you speak, after they have outlined everything, say, well, have you ever considered the long-term ramifications of you receiving an emotional support animal letter? What that might do to future education possibilities, future employment possibilities, future, who knows, possibilities, right? Most people don't ever know that there is a yin to the yang when you get an emotional support animal. A service animal as well, there's a yin to a yang, but most of the time with service animals, they're supplying a service that's been trained to be done, not just something that is emotional, that it's supporting you. It's much more clearly defined, although you can ask, right? It's more clearly defined, you cannot ask, but it is part of where you want to go with your animals. So for me, a service animal is clearly defined. So it's a seeing eye dog, it's a hearing dog, it's a psychological dog, PTSD kind of dog. It's epilepsy, it's diabetes, it's support, physical support, so you can stand up. That's where the mini horses come in. And a myriad of other ones, but these dogs are specifically trained for a year to 18 months on how to do this. They don't just come out of your house because you come home from work and you pet them and you feel better. So it is a whole different type of animal. How does one balance all of three of these articles? It comes down to educating yourself and your patient, because really you have to know where you come down on this. And you can be hardwired to say, no, I'm never going to risk my license for anything, and advise your patient of that. You can then maybe work together with a forensic mental health professional to help you do this. I don't know that you relieve your responsibility totally if you do that, but clearly it's better than doing it yourself if you feel this is out of your skill set, which quite frankly, I think it's out of my skill set. I would never evaluate a dog as an emotional support animal unless I was completely trained in evaluating how emotional support animals need to be. They need to be well behaved. Even service animals need to be well behaved, need to sort of blend into the woodwork. They are not supposed to create any disruption. So for you as a mental health professional, I don't know that that's part of your training, and maybe it'll become part of your training with the human animal bond research that's being done. But right now, that's not part of your training. So for you to make that decision is way out of your comfort zone. I would think it would be way out of my comfort zone. I did say, and I can't reiterate it enough, address the stigmas gently that might attach to someone getting a letter for an ESA. It's added to their treatment plan, and it is part of what they do. So I think that you really need to make that clear for them. It's something that they need to understand may impact them later on, maybe a short-term benefit, long-term really rock them. So we went over the federal guidelines before. You really need to review them in total, in a curious way. And I suggest you do it with your patient. Hey, that's a great idea. Let's look at, what's the difference between a service animal. Let's look at what's the difference of an emotional support animal. and ask for their ideas, their interpretation, their perspectives of how they meet the guidelines. These are the two best questions that I would ask my client if they were asking me for an emotional support animal. Let's go over the guidelines because, I always look forward to refreshing my recollection on what it means, and ask them how they think they meet it, and then advise them, as I said, whatever ramifications might come from receiving this letter. One caveat in practicing conflict resolution on this topic, I said it before and I can't say it enough. I think kicking the can down the road to your forensic mental health professional isn't necessarily the best idea and may not avoid you being impleted into the discussion. Because if you've had the discussion with your client, if you're treating your client for depression, anxiety, whatever the emotional support animal is providing emotional support for, then I think you can be impleted. So I don't know that that's a better way to do it. It's one way. I don't know that it's better. Both Dr. Dingle and Dr. Youngren suggest outside evaluations. Again, these might be fraught with complications and ethical issues as well. I can't stress that enough because sometimes people say, well, I'm just going to give it to Lisa because she is a forensic mental health professional. And if I was advising a forensic mental health professional, I'd be telling them the same thing I'm telling you. Stop, drop, and roll, and make sure you understand and your client understands the limitations on owning and bringing an emotional support animal into the public square. So I believe in setting boundaries to be the best process to avoid or address conflicts over ESA. It starts with addressing the issues up front, deciding whether or not you want to keep the client. If you think the client really is having a great deal of assistance by your being their mental health professional, then you want to keep them. If you think that this is going to be an ongoing limitation to your ability to assist them, then maybe you don't. And as you all know, appreciation and acknowledging of how someone feels does not mean you agree. It just means that you're appreciating and acknowledging where they are. This is part of my mediation skills, and I meditate on this all the time, so I thought it was funny that Lori had made that definition when she opened up earlier this afternoon. I just think that being able to address a conflict that'll arise over an emotional support animal in a way that doesn't escalate is key. So besides stop, drop, and roll, AKA, which means address, keep, and appreciate or acknowledge, because that'll help you remember that when you're being faced with this. And it, as I said, I learned by mnemonics, so this is how I do my presentations as well. So the boundaries include allowing for or requiring an in-depth discussion on why, educating everyone on the law, I spoke about that, addressing the patient's responsibility for the pet as an ESA. So this is sort of outside your purview, because an emotional support animal and how it's trained or what's done with it. But if they ask you, I would argue that addressing the patient's responsibility for the animal and keeping it safe and giving it downtime and making sure they understand the law is absolutely key. This might be the single most important piece you do, because if you take the time to help them understand, and maybe this isn't what you want to do, and I completely understand it, because it isn't really a mental health professional's job to have someone understand with an emotional support animal, the limits, how you have to care for it. This isn't your job, but you may curse it. You may work alongside a human-animal bond person so they can take that weight off your chest and have the person understand what it means, because they are rabid animal caregivers for the human-animal bond. I mean, they really make sure that people who are using these animals as service animals or emotional support animals take really good care of the animals, because that is the number one part of the human-animal bond that most people don't understand, is that you need to give these dogs, cats, birds, horses downtime. And also the other boundary to discuss and set up is, how are they going to accommodate the people who are accommodating them? So you have people with allergies, you have people who are afraid of dogs. I said at the beginning there, I don't want this dog in my building because I'm afraid of dogs. That's why I bought in a no pet building. How do you accommodate? You would then have that discussion, and it might be, in concert with a human animal bond person. I know that's blasphemy, but it might work for you. How to accommodate the people who are accommodating them, because you don't get this broad stroke accommodation. You can take your dog anywhere in your, Louis Vuitton oversized purse because it's a small dog and it gives you, emotional support. No, there are things that are required of you, and there are things that you should want to do to accommodate the accommodator. So that's part of the training. I mean, I give it all the time on how to teach people how to accommodate the people who are accommodating them. Because if you're allergic, we just had a gentleman thrown off an airplane because he said he was allergic to the dog that was sitting in first class with him. And instead of taking the person off with the dog, they took the person off who had allergies, because that was a threat to the safety of the flight and the safety of the person. The emotional support animal wasn't. So it's always, being able to understand what you should do to be a good citizen. And maybe your clients can be, maybe they can't. So accommodating the accommodator is a discussion with your patients on their responsibility toward the public and the public square, on the language used when confronted with pushback. So this is a huge part of either yours or the forensic mental health professional's duty, in my opinion, is to teach the person who's requesting the ESA language when they're confronted with pushback, and recognizing the limitations in the law. And of course, stop, drop, and roll, you can teach them that process as well, because they should stop talking and listen. They should drop the need to be right. I always say, because you probably are, you just need to let the person vent and let what they say roll off your back, because you'll be able to find a way to get out of it without disagreement. So the question here is, so you want an ESA. The discussions do not have to be difficult. They really don't. They are because we're so afraid to just have a lengthy conversation. I believe you can set yourself up for success by using the tools I used here. Ask curious questions, start with why, and listen well before you speak. Really important. The key to successfully navigating these questions is in this article. And I have about 5 minutes left, is in this article. Good leaders don't try to be the smartest person in the room. I can really relate to this because sometimes I do lose sight of that I'm talking too much. I've talked for an hour now, and I'm hoping that all of you will ask really great questions, so I will learn so much more. And if I can be of any assistance to you in questions that you have, I'm here to answer them. But these quotes really impacted me from Bridget Hyacinth's article, because you want to try never to be the smartest person in the room. If you are, I suggest you invite smarter people or find a different room. I think Michael Dellis hit it on the head, because ethically, we know what we should and shouldn't do as professionals. You're a mental health professional, I'm a legal professional. We know what we shouldn't do. In order to address a client or a patient who needs something and wants us to provide it for them, don't try to be the smartest person in the room, because that will only serve to not serve you. You really want to be the person in the room who says, I know this, this, and this. And if that doesn't get you to the point where you want to be, let's explore the next steps with people who might know more than I do, because that will give you more leverage to have your client, your patient, understand whether or not an emotional support animal will be right for them in the long run. The next quote, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. When I read the articles by Dr. Dingle and Dr. Youngren, I said, well, there is no gray area in those articles. And they really do need, this is the mediator coming out of me, and I apologize profusely. They really do need to work with the other side of the coin, so they can either have better language to help you understand what you're supposed to do as a mental health professional, rather than just saying it's black and white. Believe me, right now, in this day and age, it's really gray. And so for us as professionals to ethically meet our needs, we really need to stop, drop, and roll. We need to ask curious questions, start with why, listen well, and then address, decide whether or not we're going to keep the client, and appreciate and acknowledge where they're coming from. They really need these animals. These animals are part of their life. They have physical changes, they believe, and you probably might see it when they have their animal in their presence. So it really is important to address that in a more holistic way. I know that word is really not a good word, and I apologize, but really it does work better. So the takeaway from this webinar, I think I'm right on time almost, you should be better prepared to address this question when it arises. Saying, no, I can't do it ethically is really good, and you can do that, and I'm not saying you can't. Your client's not going to be happy with you. We'll discuss social media if that's part of what might happen. I don't really think it does, but maybe it does, and please correct me in the chat box, and Lori will let me know. But be prepared to answer that question. You shouldn't just say, no, I'm sorry, ethically, I can't do this. Be prepared to educate them on why ethically you can't do this, and in a way that isn't confrontational, but rather helps them understand the why. You'll be able to address it in a less fearful manner for both yourself and your client. You set better boundaries. So stop, drop, and roll, address, keep, appreciate, and acknowledge. And you foster your ability to educate your client and help them understand your constraints and their constraints. And P.S., you'll also educate yourself because you really want to know more about this up and coming, going to be used every single day of every week, because animals have been shown to be able to do so much, and they may be a better assistant than other means that have been used for years. Just don't be closed-minded. I don't think that you should run out and, be friends with a human animal bond researcher, but don't be resistant, because you might actually find things that might actually resonate with you in a better way. And always, always, always choose best practices. When push comes to shove, your license comes first. I don't care who says what to whom, your license comes first. So everything I've said here comes with the caveat that choose best practices, save your license. If you need to walk away, but try to walk away without, when I say keep your client, I always say keep your client, or if you're going to send them away, don't send them away mad, because that never serves you. So with that, Lori, I'm pretty much wrapped up. I think that's my last slide almost.